Good evening, everyone. Glad that you could all make it, and I hope you can see our screen here. You should be able to see just a general slide here that says, "Welcome to Teach Anywhere, Tips and Preparation for Your Interview to the Abu Dhabi Education Council." Now, a lot of you have received quite a lot of information over the last few days, and hopefully many people are actually booked in already. So the object of this session is to really give people an understanding of the types of questions that are going to come up in the interview next week in London and Dublin, and sort of how to best prepare for those. So I'm going to go through some information here, and obviously, you know, I'm hoping that it will be quite useful for everyone. I will aim it at primary teachers and secondary English teachers, so hopefully there'll be information for everyone to be able to make use of. Okay, so firstly, before your interview, plan ahead and arrive early. We've just sent you out the venue details for the London interviews. The venue details for the Dublin interviews will be sent out probably on Monday or Tuesday next week. Do make your travel arrangements and give yourself at least an hour leeway so you can be in the hotel. It's the Westminster Hotel in London 30 minutes before your actual interview. Now we've sent you a checklist of all the documents to come to actually bring into interview, so do bring everything in that's on that checklist regardless of what you've emailed through to us. And the reason for that is that ADEC are very specific that there's a hard copy or a printed copy of everything which is on your digital file. So if in doubt, print it and bring it, because it's better that you actually have more than less. That's just a technical thing. And then finally, I think everyone here has filled out the ADEC online application form. That's the data form that just gives us the information to be able to get you into a specific interview slot. We will be chasing up people sort of just to make sure that there's no one who's been left out there. All right, so getting on to now some information about the actual interview. As you may know, it's broken into two parts. The first part is a general briefing, which is just the ADEC panel members giving you some general information about what to expect in Abu Dhabi, life in Abu Dhabi, the project, its direction, why they're doing it. It's a good opportunity for you to actually really understand the whole ethos behind it, and listen to other questions as well that teachers who are being interviewed on the same day as you will have, and that often sort of is very helpful as well. Obviously, it's a good time to be able to meet us and Teach Anywhere, and to meet other teachers who are also potentially going to be working with you as your teaching colleagues in Abu Dhabi from August to September this year. Then from your general briefing, you'll be called into an individual interview, and this is where these are the sort of details that we're going to go into in this session here. Now, we do ask that everyone is as understanding as possible, because obviously the individual interviews, people have to wait for their turn to come up. So there will be a bit of a wait generally between the briefing in the morning or the afternoon and your individual interview. So we just ask that you know, you are understanding about that, and we'll certainly try and get people in and out as quickly as possible. And if you have to wait for an hour or so, then you can just go off, have a quick coffee, and come back or whatever. But it's worked in the past, and it shouldn't be a problem this time. Now, in terms of what to wear, I would say, you know, obviously you're attending a professional interview, so modest professional attire is suitable. So if you're a guy, a suit and tie, and if you're a lady, then just professional sort of business wear that you would wear to any interview in the UK. One thing just to note, though, just remember though that you know, when you do walk through that door, you know, your first impression is often quite important, and you will be interviewing with some of the ADEC panel members who are Emiratis themselves, and a local principal, for example, who's working in one of the schools. So you just want to make sure that your clothing doesn't give the wrong impression if you put yourself in their shoes. So you know, if you have a bright pink suit jacket, for example, you know, that may not be the most sort of suitable thing to wear in this particular interview. So just bear that sort of thing in mind when you come to this interview. Now, here's something which often people forget when they're interviewing. When you're a little bit nervous or you're under pressure, there is a tendency to speak fast and to sort of get your words all messed up a bit like I'm doing right now. But the one of the things that you need to remember in your interview is that the interview panel are the whole time that you're talking, they are assessing how you will speak in front of the children in Abu Dhabi. Now, obviously, there's a lot of English students who don't speak English as their first language. Now, if you give the impression in your interview that you speak very fast or with words which aren't pronounced in a very clear way, that will sort of count against you in this particular job interview, because obviously they're looking at it from the children's point of view. They want to know that your accent and your English will be clearly understood. So just remember to speak slowly, speak like directly, and don't just rush through your answers. There's no time limit on your interview. It's a good idea, particularly if you're a primary teacher, to bring examples of some of the activities that you would do in class, some of the teaching resources that you use. There isn't always an opportunity to bring them out and to show them in your individual interview, but it's a good idea to have them to hand. I mean, not huge, big resources, but something that you can just conveniently bring with you into the interview. If you're a secondary English teacher, maybe just an example of an assessment sheet or some sort of formal assessment that you may use, that it may come up in your interview. You might be able to just demonstrate how you use some sort of formal assessment or even some teaching resources that you might use. Now, this is something which we've noticed in the past, that when you speak about some challenging experiences that you've had, say with behavioral issues or with working with EAL students, it's really important that even if you're talking about a difficult situation that you've been through or a challenging area that you've sort of experienced, it's important to pull out the positive from that. So, for example, if you're talking about a very disruptive class that you've had to deal with in some school somewhere, bring out the positive from that. So, what did you learn from that experience? What would you do differently if you went and did it again? What would you do if you had to run that lesson with another class in a different context? So try to bring out something that you've learned from it and not dwell on negative aspects, because if I just go on to the next slide, one of the key things that they're looking for is a really positive attitude, but with realistic expectations. So what I mean by that is essentially an understanding that you are going into a project which is in progress and which is in development, and if you're the type of teacher that expects everything to be just right and just in its place, like say in an outstanding school in the UK, that simply isn't the situation in Abu Dhabi, even in the best schools in Abu Dhabi, in the international schools as well, because it's a very different culture and it's a very different education sort of stage at the moment. So realistic expectations is important, but at the same time be very positive about it. You are going to Abu Dhabi to contribute to the education system, the state education system. Ultimately, you are going to educate children, Emirati children, and that's the important thing to remember. You are there to teach them. So another thing that they're looking for is I've just got a few questions here. Apparently not everyone can hear the audio. Let me just check that my audio is on. Sorry, I think we might be having some technical difficulties here. Let me just check here. I'm just writing a chat here if you can hear me speak. Okay, there should be audio coming through here as well. My system is telling me that the audio is going through, so that should be fine. Okay, we'll carry on. Just make sure that your volume is up. Okay. Right. So let's carry on with this then. So basically, what I was saying about the flexibility in terms of life in the Middle East, one of the things that they're really looking for is adaptability and flexibility for your life in the Middle East. You know, they do want you to be able to adjust to the culture. It's a fantastic way to live in the Middle East. You've got great opportunities to get involved in anything you like. You know, all sorts of societies and clubs, which is great to get involved with. Any type of hobbies that you're looking for is possible there. So there's fantastic sort of a chance to get involved in that. Now, one of the things that does come up, obviously, when you're working with this project, you don't have a specific location which is given to you before you interview or even after you interview. That's actually given to you when you arrive in Abu Dhabi. Now, when you actually arrive there, now there are over 300 schools which are actually part of the Abu Dhabi education project. Now, you won't know exactly which school you're going to be in. Now, obviously, a lot of people want to work and live in Abu Dhabi city itself, and but just because of the scale of the project, it's not always the most easy thing for ADEC to be able to assign everyone to an Abu Dhabi city school. So in your interview, you can give a preference to where you want to live and work, but if you're extremely demanding about basically not wanting to consider anything but Abu Dhabi city, then that's one of the concerns for the ADEC panel, and they will count that against you in your interview. So just bear that in mind as well. Now, obviously, when you're working in schools, you're working with local Emirati principals and local teachers. And so this is another thing they're looking out for, just an ability to be able to work across cultures and work across the Middle East and be sensitive to the Arabic culture in how you express yourself, in how you work, and how you would plan your lessons with, say, an Arabic teacher, taking their opinions and their sort of their ideas into account as well. Now, differentiation is obviously a big thing. You're working with children who don't speak a huge amount of English. Some will speak fantastic English in your class, others will not. So in your interview, they'll certainly ask you about how you differentiate your lessons. And that's one thing that you may want to bring some examples into your interview, if that's something that you do in your own schools. And I think most UK or Irish schools would certainly have that element in your planning. Now, it's a learner-focused approach, which is the real emphasis of the curriculum. It's very student-focused, and it's looking at using paired work, group work, sort of hands-on activities to involve the students and to engage them. So they're really trying to break away from the model of a teacher just at the front of the classroom, just teaching from the curriculum, teaching from a plan. And essentially just lecturing. They want to break that mold, and they want to use a much more sort of student-focused approach to every class there. Now, at the primary level, the curriculum is topic-based, and so cross-curricular links are crucial for that. And I think what you need to remember is, I mean, this is stuff that you're doing anyway in your schools, and so it's in an interview. I think sometimes you have to sort of rethink about how you would communicate, how you might be able to bring science into an English lesson or maths into a science lesson, things like that at primary level. Now, extracurricular is also something which is very sort of one of the things that often comes out in the interviews. You know, ADEC are keen that you get stuck into activities and social clubs or whatever outside your school time, because obviously it is a challenging job in many ways, because it's different to what you're used to. But if you get stuck into groups and societies like desert riding or horse riding or scuba diving or whatever you want to do, that is a real indication to ADEC that you are the type of person to be able to take the whole experience into account and not just rely on you're not just going for the classroom. Basically, there is a broader part, you know, that you take into account as well. So these are some of the past interview questions which have come up, which we thought would be quite helpful to show you. And I'll just go through them one by one, and I'll sort of outline a couple of sort of questions or answers which might be useful for you. So here we go. Tell me about how you would formally assess children in your class. So again, this is something that you're doing in your school anyway. Now every school has a slightly different sort of emphasis on what is assessed, how it's assessed, but it's important to be able to communicate those methods of assessment, whether informal or formal assessments, and sort of how routinely those would be done throughout the school year or throughout the term. So think about how you would do that and how you would communicate that, and if you can bring some examples of that, then do. But that's certainly one of the topics that have come up in the interview. The second question, what behavioral strategies do you use? Now this obviously, when you're walking into a classroom, if you've got a few learners in there with limited English, behavioral issues can be one of the symptoms of that, because obviously, you know, children, if they're bored, they start playing up. And so, you know, what behavioral strategies do you use in order to deal with that? And the emphasis there will be positive reinforcement, you know, and that's what they want to hear. They want to hear that you're addressing behavioral issues in essentially creating incentives and positive reinforcing sort of initiatives to be able to deal with behavior, rather than a very sort of, you know, negative approach, which is a sort of traditional sort of approach to education. They're breaking away from that mold. So use examples in your own class from your own experience. That's what I would say there. Now, if you are going with a spouse and with children, they will ask you about that. So how will your spouse or your children manage in Abu Dhabi? They'll want to know that you've thought about the logistics, and you've thought about the practicalities, what your spouse will do. Remember that ADEC don't provide school fees for your children if you're taking them out there, so they'll want to know that it is feasible for you to move as a family. So that's the main thing there. I mean, it's not a huge deal, but just, yeah, obviously families and spouses, the accommodation and the flights is all covered for that with ADEC. Here's another typical question. Give me an example of how you would integrate science into another lesson. Now, that's something which is particularly relevant to primary, and again, it's something which you need to just draw on your own your own experience for what, you know, how they might give you a topic, for example, like boats or rivers, and they'd say, okay, so bring science and maths into that. How would you bring you know, to a year 1 class or to a KG class or a year 6 class? In English, this obviously doesn't relate as much in secondary English, but certainly for primary, cross-curricular links are quite important. So another question, what methods do you use for EAL students in your class? Again, this really ties into everything else. The focus is on positive behavioral management, hands-on resources, you know, using visual techniques and sort of drama and interactive techniques to be able to engage students who don't have a massive grasp of English, stuff that a lot of you would have experience on anyway, but you know, again, not just relying on a book, being more creative than that and using your own resources if necessary. Here's an interesting question which often comes up. How would you work with a local principal who doesn't understand your teaching approach or use of resources or method? Now remember that you're going to be in a school which you may be in a great school where the principal is very driven and really switched on and understands exactly how a Western approach to education works. But on the other hand, you may be in a school which doesn't have that. And one of the points in the interview is they will be trying to assess how you may respond if a local principal comes along and says, I didn't really understand why you were making those children do that in your English lesson. How does that help them learn? So you need to be able to communicate that to a principal, a local principal, in a sensitive way, in a respectful way. Remember, you're in another country which isn't your own. You're working with the Emirati principal who may not have the same sort of perspective as you in terms of how to deliver an English lesson, for example. But the point here is that you are not going to educate the principals. Your one focus is the children's education, and they have people in place. They have principal advisors in place who are working with the principals, and the project is a work in process. And their ultimate aim is to get every single school principal on board and absolutely sort of geared in line with the direction of the new school model. But you're on the way there, and you may be in a school where a principal is still figuring that out. So just give them, again, it comes down to a positive attitude, a realistic attitude, realistic expectations of how you can work in that school environment. And then lastly, what would you see if I walked into your class 2 weeks after you started, and again 6 months after I start, after that? And that's one of the questions that comes up quite a lot. Essentially, they're looking for, just nothing different to what you would experience back here in the UK or Ireland. It will be a good relationship, establishing a good relationship with your children in the first few weeks of your work in Abu Dhabi, and then maybe after 6 months they would expect to see that your children were really understanding the boundaries that you've put down in your class. They understand exactly what's expected of them. They would probably expect to see their work displayed on the walls, all that kind of stuff. So nothing different to what you're doing. But again, it's about communicating that and helping them understand that. So your interview panel will be made up of a local Emirati principal and probably a Western sort of experienced principal who's working on this project as well. So you have both of those people on your interview panel. And so when you answer these questions, try to put yourself in the shoes of that local person who is really trying to understand where you're coming from. And so in your communication, just be mindful of that. So just a few notes on post-interview. So after you get through your interview, you'll obviously receive an offer letter if you're successful. You'll know about 2 to 3 days after your interview if you have been shortlisted. And generally speaking, if you're shortlisted, there's an extremely high chance that you'll get a formal written offer letter. Now, after that, there will be the attestation of your degree and teaching certificate. Now, when you teach in Abu Dhabi or any of the Middle Eastern countries, this is something that every single teacher has to do, regardless of whether you're in an international school or in a government project. This is for your work visa. Now, we will give you clear instructions on how to do this, and this does not have to be done before your interview. But there is an expectation that this will be done as soon as possible after you've signed your offer letter, because your visa can't be issued until this is done. So make sure that that you sort of factor that in to your sort of cost analysis as well. It does cost in the UK. It costs around £80, 60 to £80 per document. So there is some sort of an investment. But again, this is something you'd have to do if you want to teach in any country in the Middle East. So after you attest your documents, ADEC then applies for your visa, and then you fly out to Abu Dhabi, and you are put up in a hotel initially in August, and that's when you actually start orientation, and you're actually in your in Abu Dhabi in a hotel which is paid for, and then finally you're allocated your school and your individual accommodation, and then it's all done from there. So then you get on with the job. So we may have some.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.